Great. Welcome, everybody. Thank you, those of you on Zoom that are letting us see your faces. That helps a lot. Just the two of us. We know that this is a really, really stressful time. And so we're going to do our best to give you kind of both a medical overview and a psychological overview of how you might proceed in this particular time of the marathon that is COVID. And also then we're going to end with all kinds of ideas for, I've been collecting ideas all afternoon of things that maybe are fun and that you can do during this time. So first, we're going to hand over to Lisa, who is our resident physician, to just talk with us about kind of where we are with COVID scientifically and medically.
Great. Hi, everyone. I'm Lisa, and I saw your question, Judy. We will get to that for sure. So I'm going to do my first public sharing of a screen. Oops, but that's the wrong video. I mean, that's wrong. I can just go back. Sorry.
It looks like your one pager.
Yeah, that comes up later.
Wow.
So this is, sorry, and I'm sorry I blocked us out on
Instagram. You're not going to be able to see the screens, but the recording of this will be on social medias later. Go ahead.
Great. And this is a screen. Should I just do this for a second? This is a graph that shows that the United States is not doing so well. I think we kind of had a glimpse of that. I know as we were following what was happening in Spain and Italy with really heartbreaking number of cases, and then we started seeing those cases decline. Well, the United States is not seeing a decline in cases. And so sometimes people talk about, is there going to be a second wave? And the reality is we are not anywhere near past our first wave. And I think this is due to a number of things. I think Americans are a little bored right now and are starting to take more risks. And we will talk about that in a minute. And then in talking about Oregon, because I know a lot of us are Oregonians, we know that Oregon's not doing all that well, that we're having a record-breaking number of new cases every day until June 7th, which was about 3 weeks after our first counties went into phase 1 reopening. We had never had a day with more than 100 new cases of COVID. Now we're regularly in the hundreds, and we've even surpassed 200s on a few days. So we're definitely seeing a rise in cases, and this is a result of reopening, although I think there are ways we could have done this to beat some of this back, and we will talk about that in a little bit. And then this last slide shows what's changed in Oregon. And this is that, certainly in the first 4 to 6 weeks of COVID, it was mostly cases that were taking place in congregate living situations, most notably nursing homes, as well as jails. Now we're seeing that the age groups of the 20 to 29 are getting it through social spread, through parties, through interactions on a social level. And this has been borne out by a lot of analysis of the cases that we're seeing. So I am going to no longer share these things. So what we're seeing is that as Oregon reopens, we're seeing an increased number of cases. And while that's shouldn't be surprising, I do think a lot of these cases could have been preventable. I do believe that a lot of people are not maintaining, the public health measures that we've been doing from day one, which is maintaining social distancing of 6 feet or greater, hand washing, trying not to touch your eyes, nose, or mouth. And then, the newest thing that's been added into our arsenal of protecting ourselves is masking. And we've known for about a month, actually, we've known for about 6 weeks, that masking is very effective at preventing the transmission of COVID. And remember, and we talk about this a lot, the magic trick of this virus is that you can be spreading the virus without feeling sick at all. That's what has made this such a tricky thing to stop the spread of, right? Because once you're sick, you know to take yourself out of commission, right? But before you're sick, you don't know that. And that's why masks are so important. And we all know that masks protect you from getting sick, but probably it's even more effective at protecting you from getting someone else sick, from spreading the droplets that contain viral particles to the people who you are around. So we could spend a whole hour just talking about masking, and I would love to, but we won't today. I will say that Governor Brown has called for mandatory masking in 7 counties in Oregon, and that includes the 3 in the metro area, Multnomah, Clackamas, and Washington counties. And these 7 counties together, and this is a little pun, cover 55% of all Oregonians. So in theory, over half of Oregonians are mandated to wear masks in indoor spaces where social distancing is not possible. There's a lot of caveats to that, and I'm frustrated that there's a lot of like, it has to be this, oh, and you have to be over 12, this, and this in order to be mandated to wear a mask. I wish it was a little more of a blanket statement, but that's where we are. I did just read, like, hot off the press, Washington State is requiring masking for the entire state, indoors and outdoors.
We should be doing that.
Hmm?
We should be doing that.
Right. California is requiring masking in the entire state, indoors and outdoors. So there's not all these little, and in terms of penalties for violating the order, almost everyone says, but we're not going to really enforce it. Don't worry, including the health department of Multnomah County. So our numbers are probably going to keep going up, and the way I think we have to really talk about masking, and the governor did do this today, which I was happy to see, is masking allows us to reopen, right? Masking allows us to see our friends. Doreen and I took a walk last week with our masks. We should feel really happy and grateful that masking works to prevent the spread of COVID, and we should embrace it. And like so many things these days, masking has become politicized. And I think that this follows a long historical trend of these things becoming politicized, including how we talked about measures to protect yourself against HIV back in the 80s and 90s. But I mean, what I would love to see is like masks everywhere. Like there should be a stack of masks everywhere we go. I wish every American were sent 10 reusable masks. I mean, it should be easy. It should be ubiquitous to get a mask. It's not. We're all kind of self-sourcing and talking to friends and going on Etsy. But be that as it may, I think we've all made our point. Please wear a mask.
So Lisa, a couple of things I'd like to ask you about. You mentioned that the age, the newest, and I think this is reflected nationally. That's what I'm curious about, that the age of those contracting the illness or the virus is now in younger groups. And also, so that's the number one question. Number two is, what about children? We both have had people come to us and say, well, we've heard scientific data that children can't pass the virus. So can you address those two things?
Yeah. I do think the trends nationwide have been that it's no longer confined, or no longer majority confined to nursing homes, as states are reopening and we're seeing crowded bars. So it's happening more in younger age groups. So, and in terms of, and just speaking for Oregon, this very arbitrary decision to say 12 and older should be masked, or maybe it's older than 12. I can't remember if it's, you have to be 13 or you have to be 12 in order to be required to wear a mask. I scoured the Oregon Health Authority site to see what their reasoning was behind. I'm like, is there something I'm missing here? I'm humble. I'm willing to be taught that 2 to 12-year-olds don't need to wear masks. 2 to 12-year-olds do need to wear masks, but the Oregon Health Authority said it's a lot to ask a 2 to 12-year-old to wear a mask. And I will just say, I've been sitting in exam rooms with families for a month when we've required masking, and sure, they fiddle with them and stuff, but they're wearing masks. They get it. They're smart kids. And I do think that that the messaging, once again, from the leadership in Oregon is very muddled. And the OHA will even say that, hey, we really want 2 to 12-year-olds to wear masks, but we're worried it's asking too much of them. But then I've seen graphics that said, hey, masks are for 12 and older, like really almost saying that 2 to 12-year-olds do not need to wear masks. There is some lore out there that 2 to 12-year-olds cannot spread COVID. There's absolutely no scientific evidence that that is the case. So until we know that to be true, and I can't imagine why it would be true, because they sneeze and they cough, and we know what 2 to 12-year-olds do with their boogers, right? it's, there's absolutely no way we can assume they can't spread COVID. I think it is true that most children and young adults who get COVID do not have serious complications from it. But when you start getting enough numbers of people, a big enough denominator, we are going to see young people get very, very sick with COVID, and we're going to see young people die from COVID. We've seen it in New York, where they have a large number of cases. And if our case count gets big enough, we will see it here.
So Lisa, then is what you're saying, that the same things we knew when we started phase 1 are still important at this point of phase 1, like not lingering outside? I mean, I know we know now that we can be outside at 6 feet if we wear a mask that protects other people from us, if we're shedding droplets but don't have symptoms. But is it still true that we should be privileging, not lingering a lot outside unless we can have appropriate distance? We should still be, staying home. Tell me about that. What about things like airplanes? Things like, there was something else we had talked about earlier, but tell us about, just tell us about that.
Show my little chart, my little graph.
Oh, sure. Yes, you should. And I'll help the Instagram people see this one, hopefully.
So this, I think, is a nice graphic. I didn't make it. It's from this amazing epidemiologist out of Harvard, which just kind of shows you what we call harm reduction in COVID. So, I think we all understand that staying completely isolated carries its own burden. So how can we open up our lives safely? So if you look at this, the safest thing is still to stay home alone or with your group of people that you are kind of cohorting with. And certainly that is still the recommendations for people who have significant health risks, heart disease, diabetes, hypertension, immunosuppressed from medication or from cancer. And certainly if you're in close contact with someone with high health risk, you too should be staying close to home. But being outdoors is actually much safer than being indoors. But the reading I'm seeing is it still is important to stay 6 feet apart from people outdoors. And if you're going to be closer than 6 feet apart from people, even outdoors, you should wear a mask. And that is the law, or the ruling now in California. And then actually gathering outdoors, the fewer number, the better. The fewer people, the better. And masks if you're within six feet. And then group gatherings indoors carry the highest risk, and it has to do with ventilation. And I would call even higher risk than group gathering indoors is the ultimate group gathering indoors, which is a frickin' airplane. And so I just want to be clear that, if you're taking an airplane ride, you are taking a risk. And you have to weigh that risk, just like we weigh risk on so many different things. Do your best to not have someone sitting next to you. Do your best. You need to wear a mask the entire time. So those are ways to mitigate that risk.
Okay,
and
can you talk to us? Oh, go ahead.
I know that Judy asked about taking a trip to the beach. I think, again, being outdoors is much safer than being indoors. If you're driving, I would drive in a car only with your cohort. And then taking a walk on the beach would be great. If you wanted to dine, I would recommend dining outdoors at the beach or bring a picnic. I think that would be completely safe. And my understanding is with the beach communities, they're mostly in phase 2. Do you know on that, Vicki? Are you guys phase 2?
We're phase 2 and just driving through downtown. No one's wearing masks. They're walking around in groups. So a lot of our places are staying shut or only letting one person in at a time. A lot of the restaurants aren't opening up because they're nervous about that.
The residents of the beach communities to COVID.
Yeah. Anyway, so we're getting way too many to
yeah. Right.
I know. And they're coming from Seattle and Portland, where Portland, where it's phase 1. They're coming here and thinking, okay, we get to eat inside and we get to do this thing. So.
Right. Someone asked about filtration systems on. Thank you, Aunt Vicki. Someone asked about filtration systems on airplanes. I have not seen evidence that is sufficient to not consider it an indoor space with people you don't know. That said, I may choose to fly this year. I'll be really honest. But I'm weighing a bunch of different things there.
Yeah, I love that you bring up that thing that we always have to bring up, is that there are risks and rewards, and it isn't an all one answer. It's a very individualized. Every single situation needs its own kind of evaluation of the risks and the rewards, and with science in mind. So Lisa, the last thing before we go into psychology and the very difficult mental health realities related here, can you talk about testing and kind of the hierarchy of tests, the kind of tests, and what a negative test means?
Okay. Someone asked about what Aunt Vicky said about.
I will write that right now.
Okay. So there are two main tests. I'm going to use tests because one is investigational. One is a test for if you have COVID right now, and that's the Q-tip shoved down the nose. And that tells you, do you have COVID, in your airway, which is where COVID lives, at this one moment in time. So, did I not admit Deborah before? Sorry. And there are a lot of different places to get those kind of tests done. And there are, I have heard the rapid tests, the ones where like, no, your answer in 15 minutes is less accurate than the tests that take about 24 hours. But gone are the days, I hope, of like waiting 2 weeks for your COVID results. And then there are tests that are called antibody tests. And, historically, when we measure your immunity to a disease, we measure your antibody response. So I know a lot of people when they're pregnant, they get a test to see if they've had chickenpox. Because if you become sick with chickenpox when you're pregnant, it's dangerous for the baby. Well, now we have antibodies to chickenpox if we've been vaccinated against it. So the thinking is, wow, if we can show that we have antibodies to COVID, wow, then we don't have to worry about getting COVID. We had it, we probably weren't that sick with it, and now we can just kind of walk through life, free and clear. Well, it's just not clear yet to us scientifically what those antibodies mean, in the sense is, does it confer long-term immunity and protection from COVID? And that's why antibody testing right now is considered investigational, still an area of study. So unfortunately, even though intuitively those of us who've been, reading and doing this stuff thinks, wow, you have antibodies to COVID, that is awesome, it may not mean very much. So I've noticed there are quick clinics around town doing antibody testing against COVID, and it kind of bothers me because I'm very concerned that it's going to lead to a false sense of security for people who find out that they carry antibodies to COVID.
Yes, and that also the reality that if you do have a negative test, that negative test is only valid as long as it's just you with yourself. As soon as you've been exposed to anyone else, then there is that potential. So to be aware of that risk again that you're taking.
Yeah. Right.
Anything else, Lisa, before I start talking about mental health issues?
I know you asked about herd immunity.
Oh, yeah.
And certainly we talk about we won't be safe to go back to kind of full opening until we have herd immunity. And that means 93 to 95% of people who you're in and around have immunity to COVID. And right now, because we're not sure what these antibodies mean, I think that's only going to come with a vaccine. And even then, there might be caveats to that. We may be having to be vaccinated every year against COVID. I don't know. There's already some mutations being found to COVID. So there's no safe way to get to herd immunity just by getting everyone sick or by having everyone become sick because of the 3 to 5% fatality rate. So when we talk about herd immunity and kind of going back to life before COVID, it's going to take a widespread administration of a vaccine that works. That's a long ways off. That's at least a year off from now.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I'm going to address a little bit about just why this is becoming so exhausting. Actually, before we do that, though, a new question just came in on Instagram that I think, Lisa, you should address. What about public transportation versus Lyft and Uber?
None of it is great right now, just in terms of, just pure risk. But I would say I would kind of bunch those together. I don't think Lyft or Uber is necessarily safer than public transportation. Obviously be masked, obviously use hand sanitizer. If you have wipes to wipe down the area that you're sitting, that would be great. But I just want to keep reiterating, you are mostly getting sick from another person, You're not going to get sick as much from surfaces, although I would still be cautious about it. You're going to get sick by being within several feet of someone who's shedding virus and who's not wearing a mask. So
the
I
other
would,
thing that I can say is that
Yeah.
Lyft and Uber have both come out with statements, I checked on this today, requiring drivers, even if it is rainy or inclement weather, to keep windows open and to have everyone masked. So that is one good thing.
I didn't know that about the windows open or even the masking. And certainly TriMet is requiring masks in Oregon. And my understanding is they have masks available for riders.
They do.
Yeah.
Okay, so the World Health Organization and both APAs, the American Psychiatric and American Psychological Association, are predicting and now showing a huge, like what we have been talking about, Lisa and I, on these calls, a third wave with COVID, which is going to be the mental health wave. And I'm already seeing evidence of it. And one of the mental health factors that we're thinking about and talking about when we talk about this is the pure exhaustion and the very short fuse that everyone has about COVID. So most people have very strong feelings that fall closer to one end of a continuum or not, saying this is, we're still in the same place, this is still highly contagious, we don't know that much about it, or the place that says, hey, this is done and we don't have reason to be concerned. And as people get more and more steady into those camps and have less and less psychological reserves, we're going to see big, huge messes relationally happening. So, fights within families, fights within friend groups, a lot of judging, and a lot of really hurt feelings. So the first thing that I want to encourage is that this is not the time to have difficult political, probably conversations about COVID. This is the time to probably make peace, to agree to disagree, and to make also a lot of plans about the fact that if we within a family have different standards of how we are going to protect ourselves versus not, that we may go longer periods of time without seeing each other, that there will just be some natural consequences as a result of that. If there are ways that we can do that while still valuing and loving each other, that will help with the psychological fallout. Right now, it's not especially a place to have these conversations in social media. These are conversations where if they come up in social media, it's important to state scientific fact, but it's probably important to have those conversations in places that aren't going to be so inflammatory right now, simply because we don't have the psychological reserves. And when we do those things in public settings, they also have a fallout effect, a ripple effect in places that we just don't know. We are seeing early accounts of suicide rates going up. We are definitely seeing an increase in requests for evaluation for depression and anxiety. And so we just have to be aware that we don't know someone else's journey when they come to us. And so to respond to their mental health as much as we are also responding to concern for their physiological health. That being said, we also have to be aware that we all have a confirmation bias. And what confirmation bias means is that wherever we fall on that long continuum, we are probably likely going to seek out and pay attention to evidence that reinforces our own belief about the virus. So if you or someone is a person who does not believe that this is still a very, very serious, very lethal, very psychologically difficult virus that we are combating, you're going to find evidence for that and use that to buttress your own belief. Lisa and I, in preparing for this call, we own that we have a confirmation bias, that we believe this is a very serious virus, that still we do not have the ability to really push back against it, other than by doing the things that we're doing, carefully weighing the risk, keeping 6 feet of distance, wearing masks, washing our hands, staying home when we can, being very aware of immunocompromised and other folks. And if we are going to have any contact with them, making sure that we have quarantined ourselves faithfully for 2 full weeks.
Mm-hmm.
So these things are, but we know we're going to seek that out. So it's just important to be aware of that. We also want to add to this equation that we've been giving people, which is kind of the idea of the equation that you consider when you make a decision is the size of the space and the amount of ventilation within the space, plus the number of people within that space and the ability to get distanced, plus the amount of touching that happens in that space. So for instance, if you're going to have a picnic with each other, people bringing their own food rather than touching, you know, everybody's food, or a thrift store is going to have a lot more touching of the objects than, let's say, a box store where there are many that you could just take your object off. But we have decided that there is a fourth category we need to add to that. So ventilation and space size, number of people, and amount of touching. The fourth characteristic that we have to add to this equation now is psychological tenacity and grit. And this just means, how willing are we to do the very hard thing of sticking with these very, very hard guidelines? And when we become lax and exhausted and tired and we let them slip, we are much more likely to continue to let them slip over time. And so we want to think about the fact that that we have to think about tenacity. And so what that means is that for adolescents, they're just going to have less tenacity and grit than we as grown people do. They're going to, when we get them together and we put, you know, hula hoops in the backyard and say everybody stays in their hula hoops, if you have to get out of them to go use the bathroom, you put a mask on to use the bathroom, we have to be prepared that they're going to scooch those hula hoops closer together, or that if we go out with people for a distance walk or hike and there are a lot of people there, we end up being closer together. We have to kind of think about, what is our level of willingness to be the person who comes along or who comes awake to the moment and says, oh my goodness, we need to change this. We need to, you know, move away from each other a little more. We need to have a hard conversation. We need to agree within families when we get together with another family unit. Here is what we are feeling in terms of how we want to handle get-togethers. We want to have everybody bring their own food, everybody bring their own drinks, or we would like to share food, but we're going to have Lysol wipes where you wipe off the handle of the spoon before you scoop, whatever it is. But to have those hard conversations, and I would actually encourage every family to have what I call an informed consent, where before you choose to add anybody to your pod or you choose to have a gathering with people, you all do some talking, whether that be an email or in person, about what does this mean? Like, okay, so everybody's over here and we're having a distance picnic in my backyard, and somebody comes in to use the bathroom and comes out and says, oh my gosh, Doreen, you got a new piece of furniture. And suddenly 3 people are in there, not because we're horrible people, but because we just don't think about it, you know, and that slippage that happens. I'm going to have to be the one, or can one of us please be the one, and can we agree ahead of time that we will have the hard conversation about, like, oh, we gotta back up and gotta Lysol and clean up. Does that make sense, Lisa? Am I describing that well?
I want to know why you went furniture shopping.
Yeah. If it happens.
No. I thought that, yeah, that's all good.
Okay. So then the final thing that I want to talk about in terms of mental health, and I want you to think about this not only for yourself, but for those in your communities, especially those people who are isolating alone or who are isolating with someone who is immunocompromised. I think in my experience, those are some of the people that are having the most difficult time, because they would love to be able to go out and do more things or get more takeout, but because of their commitment and relationships, they are not able to. So with these folks and with ourselves, we need to be thinking a lot about self-care. We need to be thinking about those hard conversations, and we have to have a good, solid equation in our minds, and maybe you even write it out and put it outside your doors or whatever, about how you are handling and making decisions. And then finally, I think we have to have some really good and consistent ways of working through big emotions. The longer this goes on, the more loss we experience. You know, I just had my speaking engagements for, I hate to say this, but for January, all canceled. So I've now had, you know, 7 or 8 months worth of canceled things that I was really looking forward to. And I know that's small compared to what some people have missed. So, which brings up another issue psychologically, as people are now having to think about, do I cancel a wedding, or do I cancel, you know, these other big events, as venues are limiting again, saying, whoops, we shouldn't have said 100. Now we're back down to 25. I'm hearing a lot of people then making decisions about maybe private venues where they can still gather 100 people. So what we have to think about in those kinds of situations is, are we ready to take the psychological risk of our party being the next hotspot? You know, we have seen that the hotspot now is not you know, retirement centers. It is small family gatherings, or like in Oregon, in a church where we had massive number of people who tested positive after gathering. And so we have to think about the psychological impact of, are we ready to be that? And if we're not, then we need to really be careful about those gatherings. working through big emotions is just doing some things. And I've got lots of articles you can find on my website about just how to do that. But we're going to need to consistently do that, because otherwise our margins get thinner and thinner, and we become more and more reactive and less likely to do what we need to do to stay safe. Lisa, did I miss anything?
No, good point. I was looking at our list. No, I think you got it all. Yeah,
So,
I think it's
go ahead.
about communication, and someone on Facebook, Nancy, talked about there's we can kind of rate ourselves, like, I'm a 1, I'm really just going to stay home, or I'm a 5, I'm willing to meet you, for outdoor meal. I think it could be a new Facebook status.
There you go. I like it. That's a really great, I love that. Coming up with a shared way of ranking it, and then sharing your number.
And then you can have that communication with your friend and feel like you're on the same page.
Nancy's a really great creative person. Thank you, Nancy.
Yeah.
So let's kind of talk then about decision making, Lisa, and I'll kick us off by one thing that we talked about earlier was, so restaurants are open now. Do we want to dine outside? Do we want to dine inside? And kind of what Lisa and I came to is, again, thinking about the risk and reward.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it's still, you need new tastes in your life. Get takeout, bring it, either take it outside to a park where you really can distance for a long ways, or bring it home. Lisa also said she does feel like, in terms of spread, that dining outside at a restaurant, if they've taken the right measures, would be okay, right?
Yeah, I think I did it once with my son. It was so fun. I love going out to eat. So I took Hank out, and we went to McMinimum's, and we were like in the middle of a parking lot at a table more than 6 feet away from our neighbors. And we had a server who was great and was masked. I think it gets tricky, the mask slips, so that's where I think it gets tricky. You're putting a lot of trust in a stranger who's going to be within 6 feet of you, that they're wearing their mask appropriately. And we decided to take that, and we're outdoors, so that makes it a little bit better. So we decided to take that risk, and we were really glad we did. But I personally, again, I'm not a 5, I'm probably a 4 or whatever, if we talk about how open we are to just going back to life as more as normal as possible, but within the constraints of phase 1 and phase 2. I don't anticipate sitting inside a restaurant for a long time. Yeah. I think I'm really glad that Oregon or Portland's looking into, closing off streets, so there'll be outdoor dining, that can go through October. And then we'll probably go back to takeout. And even then, I don't anticipate going to restaurants that often, but just at the basic science of it, if you're seated indoors and you're more than 6 feet away from people who are also there, and your server is masked, you should be pretty safe. I mean, the server's not necessarily that safe, and that's a little troublesome, but the mask on the server does protect them to some degree, but less so than it protects you from getting sick from them. So that's kind of my messy way of thinking about it. And certainly if I were someone who's taking care of, an ill mother at home, I would not be going to restaurants.
Yeah, there's a question.
I would like it if you could talk a little about, this has gone on long enough that probably a lot of us are having medical appointments and dental appointments.
Medical appointments. What should we be doing about medical appointments? Okay, go ahead, Lisa.
She's talking to her Instagram. Yes.
I'm having shoulder replacement surgery tomorrow, and we're a little
You are
weird about it.
Yeah. You got COVID tested, right, David? Did you get a test? Yeah.
Yeah, I got COVID tested.
Yes. Yeah. And then Cheryl, you can't really be there, right? You can't accompany him. Yeah. So my friend David is having shoulder replacement surgery tomorrow. I think that the hospitals are doing a really good job. I do think they do not want you to get sick with COVID. And I think by testing you, that obviously protects you, but it protects everyone else at the hospital. I think it is hard that, your wife Cheryl can't be there for that. And I know there's been a lot of people on FaceTime in the recovery room and things like that. Are you going to need to stay overnight, or is it outpatient?
One night.
One night. You're going to be taken care of by people with lots of masks and things like that. But I think that will be fine, and as fine as it could be. I mean, certainly better now than in early March before we knew what we were dealing with, right? So I think if there are things you can delay, do, but I know shoulder replacement, the longer it goes, the more painful it is. Certainly anything that feels the least bit elective. I mean, not elective, like even less needed than elective, I would certainly put off. But you know, I'm seeing patients a lot in the office, and we're not having anyone sit in our waiting room. We're taking everyone's temperature, everyone's masked. I think it's about as safe as it could be, and we're really making sure kids are staying up to date on their vaccine. So,
Lisa, what about schools, camps, and what we had said 3 things? School, I don't know. I only wrote down. Oh yeah. Well, let's do school. Well, you can talk about all 3: dentists, schools, and camps.
Daycare.
Oh, daycare. That's right. Sorry.
Yeah,
Daycare.
these are tough. You know, these are tough, and I want to be very, very sensitive to the fact that we all are in different places in our lives in terms of what we have flexibility over.
And not just flexibility over, but also what our family's emotional needs are. Like for a parent who is not intended to be an at-home parent.
Thank you.
I just want to own that too, the mental health piece.
Absolutely. No, absolutely. Thank you. So, you know, daycare, I think, you know, daycare is riskier than staying at home, but I think there's ways to do it safely. Kids are not going to socially distance, and certainly if they're under 2, they're not going to be wearing masks. And I think to expect kids like 2 to 4 to wear masks in a daycare setting is rough, because you know, it's going to be the daycare provider's full-time job to keep those masks covering the noses. But I think what could be really nice is if we have a cohort of kids in a given room with teachers, and if that cohort stays the same, you are then kind of limiting your contact to those 4 or 5 families. And it would be great if the 4 or 5 families whose kids are in that room could have a conversation on where they are. And I'm going to use the 1 to 5 scale that Nancy brought up. Where are you in terms of your opening? I mean, if both parents are physicians seeing 15 patients a day, that kid's going to be bringing a much higher contact rate to that classroom than if your parents actually are able to work from home, but obviously can't work from home and take care of that child. So I think those are conversations to have, and that there's, you know, again, it's this risk benefit ratio. And then camps is pretty similar. I think most overnight camps have been canceled, if I'm not wrong on that one. So day camps, kind of similar thing. You know, day camps tend to be older kids, so I think we can expect masking, we can expect, you know, social distancing. And schools, I will tell you, I read the Oregon Department of Education report, which was compiled, you know, under the direction of the governor. And there's a spectrum for schools, you know, and school districts need to decide: are we going to be all in person, or are we going to be all remote? Are we going to be somewhere in between? And I think most schools will be somewhere in between. But the schools are definitely saying, if you're in person, we need to maintain 6 feet of distancing. We need to use masks if we're within 6 feet. So there's definitely public health requirements that need to be maintained when kids are together in school. So that's, you know, and that's as it should be, but that is obviously challenging.
What about universities, Lisa?
Yeah, I have 2 sons in university and who are just chomping at the bit to go back. And what I'm hearing is that a couple things. One is they're trying to make it so that they don't have too many kids in the same dorm room. They're keeping some dorms empty so that if kids do come down with COVID, they can be isolated. I think they need to have dorm rooms where kids can be quarantined, and quarantined means you've been exposed, but you haven't become sick yet. So we need to separate you out too. I think there'll be very aggressive contact tracing. I think there won't be big lectures meeting. I think there'll be a hybrid there too, where the lectures will be taped and you'll be watching them live, but that there'll be classroom meetings where you're trying to maintain social distancing or masked. I have a friend who's a professor at Pacific, and she says they're really looking into using shields because you can still see facial expression. And so I've just started doing a little bit of research into shields. There's not as much research on shields as there are on masking. To me, it feels like stuff can still get up under that because it's just but maybe that is a middle ground with social distancing that might make that a more meaningful experience.
The other thing that I did read on shielding today is just that the shields that come from above, don't help with the not touching the face. So there is some evidence that the shields that come from below may be more helpful, but again,
yeah,
not huge science.
yeah.
Okay, well, I want to share with you all, unless Lisa, is there anything else? I just thought I'd send folks off with a big list of some fun ideas of things they can do during this time. Anything else you want to pitch in before I do that?
No. And does anyone else in the audience have a question? I'm not seeing anything more. Okay, great. So nice to see all these people on Instagram.
We will have this. Oh, did somebody say something?
No. I just was saying.
We'll have this on our socials because we have a recording of it. So please share it with people, especially want to help you be aware of the mental health. This is really exhausting, hard stuff with the potential of creating a lot of conflicts within families and friend groups. Let's do all that we can to continue to be safe, but also be loving and supportive, and also find ways of having fun. In the chat, and I will post this on Instagram in my story later, you'll see a little PDF at the top of the chat area if you're in Zoom, and it has a car scavenger hunt. And the thing that I want to most strongly encourage you to do is find a family or another couple or another person and decide to do this scavenger hunt together. It was created by a woman, a therapist in Seattle who's amazing. And you can join up in a parking lot 6 feet apart, and then you go off to complete the photo scavenger hunt. And then you come back and from your 6 foot distance, share your photos with each other. And it's really fun when there are some things where you have to get out of the car and somebody has to film you doing like a 6 car length, race walk, and you can judge each other's technique and things like that. So I want to recommend that. There are places to rent kayaks and canoes all over, in cities with water. That's another great idea to get out and get active. Scoop ball or track ball, the big handled things. I'm going to keep suggesting that. That's a great thing because kids can be at a distance and they never have to touch the ball with their hands. They just scoop it up. Driveway concerts are becoming quite a fun thing that are fun if you have a couple guitars and a cajon, in the driveway where people can be 6 feet apart, and they can, you can make music and invite other people to come and participate. And a lot of local artists actually are offering to do driveway concerts for very low fees as a way of, really kind of trying to support their art. So if you or your family have an artist that you love, I would strongly encourage you to check them out. They might be willing to just come set up in your driveway and do a little concert. Multiple slip and slides is an idea that I have seen that is amazing. And if you can get them far enough apart in a yard, you can have a couple of kids who are, or kids from family 1 and family 2. That can be another fun thing. Ice blocking, where you get a big block of ice from 7-Eleven, take it to a park with a towel, that park that has hills, you sit on the ice block and you slide down the hills, and every time it gets more and more slippery and fun. Another thing that my kids used to love to do that I was realizing this is perfect for quarantine, you get a big board, just go to Home Depot or wherever and they have a whole free section usually that you can get scrap. And you get a scrap board, you fill up balloons with paint and you tack them by the little knot part onto the board, and then the kids from a distance can throw darts and they explode and it creates a big piece of art that's kind of fun. Farmers markets, this is a fantastic time, and most farmers markets, I've looked at them because I thought we might have some Californians and Washingtonians and then Oregonians. Most of them are requiring masking and only allowing a certain number of people into the actual market at a time. So those do seem like pretty good options, and with that way we support our local farmers. And then finally, just thinking about camping or even putting up a tent in your backyard or on your patio as a way of just having a little bit of extra space and room. So that's what we have for you. We have ended these things with meditations. We've ended them with dance sessions. Yes, we have actually a question.
I just wanted to say a serious thing that could maybe be educational for all of us. I heard a Black woman speaking on the PBS NewsHour maybe about 2 weeks ago. And she said that it can be a real conscience-raising process for white people, because we now feel anxious every time we go out, every time we see somebody. We don't know what's going to happen. And for people of color, that's an everyday reality. So I'm trying to reframe some of this awfulness that we're feeling to be a consciousness raising piece for all of us.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, that was, yeah.
That reminds me that we need to say is that this virus is disproportionately impacting the poor and people of color. And so, you know, and I'm part of a healing circle in Chicago, and one of the things that the Black mamas on these calls, who I love so much, keep saying is we go to the white suburbs and no one's wearing masks. But in our neighborhood, we have 3 or 4 people hospitalized every day, you know, and so it is up to us. It's part of our privilege that we get to even think about whether or not we're going to wear a mask. And that needs to end. That has to end, that we are doing this to protect our Indigenous and Black and brown and poor neighbors. This is up to us. So thank you so much.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you all for being here. And you know, you can reach out to Doreen and I with any questions or thoughts. And yeah, I'm going to be putting this up on my campaign Facebook page, and it's on Doreen's Instagram. But thank you all. Reach out for anything. We'll be, you know, doing these, I don't know, monthly or something-ish is where we are, you know, depending on what happens. And grateful to see all you.
Yeah. Thank you, all of you. More soon.
Thanks. Bye-bye.